I know you only got a few minutes, so I was hoping you could tell me what your personal view and the people you're talking about, how do you see this playing out in economically and with all this stimulus, and there's talks that there's going to be even more, and it seems like they might even need to resort to giving most people money every month if they keep shutting things down. What are you foreseeing out of the economy?
Right, well, a couple of things. I mean, you put your finger on the most important variable, which is psychology. Forget, if you have a 90-year time series, I might be interested, but these people looking at 20, 30-year time series and standard models, they have no idea what's going on because they don't have the right database. Number one, I grew up in the 1950s and the early 60s. I did not live through the Great Depression, but my parents did, and my grandparents did, and I can tell you that had an intergenerational effect. All right, so I wasn't in the Great Depression, but in the 50s, we saved rubber bands. We collected newspapers. So you never threw away a tin can because we collected them. Like we walked around the neighborhood with our wagons and collected tin cans and put them in like a Boy Scout, a collection point. We didn't think we were recycling or saving the environment. We were like, hey, tin's valuable. It's got steel in it. It's like, let's make tanks or whatever we need to do. We had that, Depression and I'll say World War II mentality. In World War II, people had victory gardens. They were growing food in their backyard because their industrial agricultural complex was trying to feed the troops. And You didn't waste money. You didn't throw away leftovers. You didn't spend extravagantly. Now, by the 70s, that had all worn off, and here comes the baby boom, and we're spending like crazy and have been ever since. But my point being, the effects of the Great Depression, which took place, of course, in the 1930s, lasted until the 1960s, even later. It was 30 years before that mentality really wore off. And in my view, what we're going through right now will have a similar impact, which is why we will not have a V-shaped recovery. Half the V, yes, straight down, absolutely. And also bear in mind, in the Great Depression, unemployment went to 25%, but it took 3 years. This happened in 3 weeks. I mean, there has never been anything like this in U.S. history, ever. The aggregate statistics will be comparable to the Great Depression or worse, but the time frame is greatly compressed. It's a shock. People have barely internalized this. I mean, you can look at the headlines and say, "Oh, stocks are up, stocks are down, whatever." But this, show me anyone who doesn't know someone who's been laid off, hours cut back, run a proprietor where no one's in the store, et cetera. So I know lots of people, and I'm sure you do as well. I mean, everyone's affected by this, if not worse. Pray for the people with the virus or people who are in critical care. So, and so let's just say 2 months from now, I'm making this up because I don't know if it'll be 2 months from now, but let's just say 2 months from now, President Trump comes out all clear. We got this thing under control. It's contained. We got the testing kits. We got plenty of medical. So let's get back to work. Who says people are going to run right out and go to the movies or go to a concert or join a parade or go to a restaurant? Of course, some will. It'll trickle back slowly. But this could affect people's behavior and consumption for years, if not longer. Number one. Number two, in terms of the V, again, I'm sure you remember in 2009, 2010, what were we hearing about on CNBC? It was, green shoots. Remember green shoots? That was supposed to be this sign. It's like Chauncey Gardner being there. It's the sign that the economy is coming back. There were no green shoots. We had 11 years of 2.2% growth. Average annual growth of all recovery since 1980 was 3.2%. We grew, but we were running on a new track that was a full percentage point lower than the long-term average growth. If 1% doesn't sound like a lot, I suggest the following. Take 1% times a $22 trillion economy, compounded over 10 years, and see how much wealth was lost. The answer is over $4 trillion. That's how much money we left on the table. The concern now is that, the economy will be open for business, but we might be on a new growth path, even lower, maybe, 1.7, 1.8%. Again, getting nowhere near the former trend. Meanwhile, we're piling on $5 to $10 trillion of debt and spending. And by the way, this is not stimulus. It is spending. It is monetary ease. They're printing the money and they're pushing it out the door. No question about it. This is not stimulus. This is like when I was a Boy Scout, I learned to apply a tourniquet. It's a little messy, but the point is, you put a tourniquet on to to stop the bleeding to save someone's life. It doesn't mean the patient's up and ready for a triathlon. It just means you saved their life. So the money the government's putting out the door, will it keep some lights on? Yes. Will it preserve some jobs? Yes. But that's not stimulus, and it won't be stimulus because the debt is too high. That's a whole separate discussion. Same thing with the Fed. And by the way, in the $2.2 trillion in the CARES Act that the government approved a couple of weeks ago, and there's more on the way, by the way. We'll see more of this in May. But in that $2.2 trillion, there was $450 billion set aside to recapitalize the Federal Reserve. And I've said for years, look at what the Fed has done. They guaranteed commercial paper. They guaranteed corporate bonds. They guaranteed municipal bonds. They guaranteed money market funds. They guaranteed the primary dealers. They're pumping money out the door. Who guarantees the Fed? And that question kind of hangs out there. Well, we just kind of found out the Treasury is recapitalizing the Federal Reserve with $450 billion. But of course, the Fed is a bank, or at least it acts like one. They're going to leverage that 10 to 1. That means they can print $4.5 trillion, okay, using the $4.5 trillion using the $450 billion in new capital. Their balance sheet is already at $5 trillion today. That's higher than it was at the height of QE3 in 2014. So you're starting with a $5 trillion base. Throw $4.5 trillion on top of that, because that's how much they can lend with this new capital. You're approaching $10 trillion on the Fed balance sheet, which is almost 50% of GDP. I mean, these numbers are not only off the charts; they've never been seen or heard of or even conceived. But that's what we're doing.